first video for the contracts course, fall of 2020, take one. In this video, I just want to bring us up to date a little bit in terms of what the postings have been about, make a couple of comments about the material that I posted, a couple of preliminary observations. By Friday, I will have the first test posted. It will be worth 20 points. We've got a quiz already. And the material will be on what I posted for the first two chapters and what I will be talking about, which just is clarifying a few points in the first two chapters, and a additional posting that I will put up later this week. And we'll have a week to do the exam, so you won't feel at all rushed. Another preliminary note, if you have questions, by all means, I want to be able to at least try to answer them. And the most effective way for you to get a hold of me, at least initially, is to send me an email at collins@ecc.edu. Messages on Blackboard are hard for me to get to if I'm using a mobile device, and in the evening or over the weekends, I typically am looking at things only on my iPhone. And my college email is very accessible on the iPhone. Blackboard isn't, so I'd appreciate if you would use the college email. But please, I like questions. It gives me a sense of what concerns students might have, particularly when we're working at this kind of artificial distance in a distance learning context. So if we look at what we've covered so far would be Monday, September 28th. We've had material posted on the first two chapters in the textbook. The first chapter is introductory material, and the second chapter is material on one of the elements of a valid contract, namely agreement. If this seems a little bit choppy, I'm recording this in my law office, and every so often there's an interruption. But getting back to the first chapter, I think there's two primary points that I would want to emphasize. Number one, the four elements of a valid contract: agreement, consideration, capacity to enter into a contract, and lastly, legality. We'll look at each one of these in depth, and as a matter of fact, in Chapter 2, we looked at the element of agreement in depth. You'll note that there's no requirement that a contract be in writing to be a valid contract. And indeed, in our lives, if we looked at it, we would see a lot of verbal or oral contracts. And the idea of a signed writing comes into play in part if we want to be prudent. Certain contracts we probably want to put in writing so there's no misunderstanding, and there's substantial money, etc. at stake. Further, there's a doctrine in the law called statute of frauds, which really has nothing to do with frauds, but has everything to do with the need to have some contracts in the signed writing for them to be enforceable. More about the statute of frauds later. The second kind of important point in the first chapter is the concept of quasi-QUASI contract, or is sometimes known as unjust enrichment. And this is where a service is rendered of some value from one person to another, and there's no agreement for the service to be rendered. And the question then becomes, well, can the person who rendered the service, which was accepted by the other person, be compensated, even though there's no agreement? And of course, the answer that lawyers like is it depends. And what does it depend upon? It depends upon whether a reasonable person rendering the service would have a reasonable expectation of compensation. And indeed, then, if there's going to be compensation, the compensation is for the reasonable value of the service that is rendered. Let me try to give you two examples. Example number one, let's assume in the winter I have a very nice neighbor who, when he's out snow plowing or snow blowing his driveway and sidewalk, is kind enough to go around the corner and do my sidewalk in the bottom of my driveway. And I know he's doing it. I'm very happy he's doing it. Well, we never had any agreement that he'd do it. He just is a good neighbor. Second example, a person is working in my house. Let's say he's doing some painting in the interior walls and ceilings at a point when I am not at home. I'm out of town for a couple of weeks, which was a good time for the work to get done. And when he comes in one morning to do the work, the painter notices, and this is in the middle of the winter, that the house is ice cold. He does minimal investigation and finds that the furnace isn't working. And let's assume he's one of these kind of handy people. He can figure these things out. And what he figures out rather quickly is that the furnace needs what's known as a thermal couplet. And it's a rather inexpensive item, and when you replace one that is no longer working, which means your furnace isn't working, when you replace it, the furnace is working and everything is fine again. He tries to call me by phone, but he can't reach me. And he's a little bit concerned because, number one, if the problem doesn't get addressed, bad things can happen, like pipes can freeze and considerable damage can be done to the house. And secondly, from his point of view, he certainly doesn't want to be in-house painting it when it's ice cold. So what he does, since he was not able to get a hold of me on the phone, he visits wherever you go to buy a thermal couplet, and he then takes the defective one out and puts the new one in, and lo and behold, the furnace is working. So we've got two examples. Let's call it example one, the snowplower, and example two is the thermal couplet guy. It seems to me that in the first example, the neighbor isn't going to be compensated under quasi-contract because, as I noted, he's just being a good neighbor. And I don't think in those circumstances a reasonable person in his shoes or snow boots would expect compensation. In the second example, however, it seems to me we're looking at something different in that it's reasonable that the person providing that much-needed service would expect compensation not only for the cost of the thermal couplet, but his efforts in going out and buying it and putting it in. And I see a big difference there between the two examples, and I'm going to say that in the second example, the thermal couplet guy would be entitled to reasonable compensation, including the cost of the thermal couplet. By the way, I picked both of those examples because I was the recipient of the services in both instances. I think the neighbor he never asked me for any money, and I didn't feel I owed him any money, though I will tell you that every winter he did it, I would buy him a bottle of whiskey. The second example, furnace repair, didn't have to ask me for money because I immediately told him when he finally got a hold of me. Not only was I grateful, but I wanted to pay him for the thermal couplet, but also, and we agreed on an amount, extra money for taking part of his day where he could have been painting and getting the thermal couplet purchased and installed. So those are some comments I wanted to make about Chapter 1. And what I'm going to do is stop this video at this point. I'm using some free program along with my cheap webcam where I've got a recording limit of 15 minutes. So let me stop here, and later this afternoon I'll make some comments about the next chapter, Chapter 2 agreement. So more later. Thanks.